In my view, my parents stood motionless, like two old wood, rooted in the ground at the threshold of my life, as if preparing to apologize, not in words, but their very insecure, worried silence, as if their eyes themselves tried to express that the language was no longer able to utter. "Thank you for making such a way," I said quietly, and my mother began to look down, in which despair and hope were mixed equally, as if she tried to see forgiveness on the floor, which she could not find in my eyes. "We heard you could help our struggling factory, and we are deeply grateful for this," my mother whispered, and her voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. My father added his calmness, and it was precisely this calmness, this imaginary resistance, with which he always came out of difficult situations, today seemed strangely inappropriate, as if he himself tried to convince himself that he could still control what was happening. His eyes turned away, not from shame, but rather from fatigue, sharing a quiet prayer for help, which hung over us, as if an old, forgotten prayer hung in the air. And it was ironic to the pain in the chest, to the stifled laughter, which stuck somewhere between the throat and the heart, that the factory, in which they were now looking for help, was the very place where their daughter worked. The daughter, whom they left in the cold mountains, as someone forgets the old letter in the box, not expecting that it will ever be read. "Let's focus on business matters," I said firmly, but restrained, feeling how my memory was trembling inside. "Please look at me," I added a little softer, as if holding out an invisible hand for them. When they raised their heads, their shocked expressions, when they heard my familiar voice, were almost comical, so much that I could not resist and laughed out loud, not from gloating, but from the absurdity of the moment, from how ridiculous it is when the past is suddenly encountered with the present. "Now, how can I help you?" I asked, already officially, calmly, almost professionally, as if there was no all that pain and silence between us. "My name is Violet Wilson," I introduced myself with restraint, but with dignity. "I live in the part of the city, which is still rural, scattered by farms and covered with the smell of freshly chopped hay. Historically, my family owned a small forge, which made and repaired agricultural tools since the time of my great-grandfather, a man with hands, strong as steel, and with a heart who knew the price of work. Over time, we began to produce details for agricultural machines and significantly expanded the business, which became known as Wilson Machinery under the leadership of my father Liam and my mother Samantha. As an executive director, their surname had a weight here, the weight that was felt in every corner of the city, in each, the sky of a bond that propagates. I have an older brother Jackson, a child prodigy, a favorite of fate and our parents, a man who was cherished with special warmth and hope, as if he were a vessel in which all the ambitions of the family were invested. He met the expectations of society, entering a prestigious secondary school, where each step of the stairs led to new opportunities. As for me, I often felt deprived of attention in a society where my daughters still remained in the shadow of my sons, and where Jackson had great hopes that he would continue the family heritage. My father sharply reminded me when I was still studying in high school that a woman could not inherit a family estate. He said it coldly, unemotional, as if the verdict said, "And that's it." These words stuck into my young soul, like ice arrows, and since then I concentrated exclusively on studying, although at that age this direction was a heavy burden that the adult world had collapsed on the shoulders too early. Jackson and I were so different that sometimes I caught myself thinking, how can we even be relatives? He succeeded in his studies, easily solving the tasks and gaining the recognition of teachers, and I ran through the fields, like a wild deer, happy in motion, in the wind, in nature. My sports achievements were the only area where I could at least somehow surpass my brother, where I felt strong, real. But the lack of academic talents made studying for me difficult, as if each task was another peak that I lacked with air. Despite all efforts, my estimates were unlikely to improve, and every time I brought my results home, I saw how my parents mocked me. "You are not at all like Jackson. Do you not see your restrictions?" Their sharp words were confused, but at the same time they inspired me with a strange determination, as if I did not live in order to prove that I could, but to prove that they were mistaken. And then the day came when my results in the middle of the exam were especially bad, despite all my hard work, sleepless nights, and notes rewritten before exhaustion. I was devastated, stood with shaking hands, as if losing support. My parents again mocked me, seeing my assessments. "We should know that further investment in you is pointless. You simply do not have what Jackson has." While I suffered their swearing, I silently prayed that this difficult deal, this moment of humiliation and pain, just ended. Fortunately, Jackson intervened and became my tutor, as if holding out to me a lifebuoy at the moment when I felt that finally atone in the cold river of misunderstanding and disappointment. He showed his support in his own way, not with loud words and not demonstrative gestures, but through patience, through the presence, through the calm power that he always radiated next to me, even if he had never expressed his emotions to our parents openly, as if he knew that excessive softness on his part would only provoke even greater severity. Jackson has always been unchanging power in my life, not loud and not assertive, but stable, like a stone in a river, which you can always stand so as not to fall. His presence was inspired by confidence, and even in the most gloomy moments when I felt weak, stupid, unworthy because of the endless comparisons and dissatisfied views of my parents, he seemed to say, "You are not the only one." And, perhaps, it was partly my fault that our parents became so demanding. Maybe I could not justify their hopes, could not match their template of the perfect child, but, in spite of everything, Jackson once told me, "Remember that I am always next to you." His words sounded simply, without pathos, but they deeply touched me to such an extent that I unexpectedly discovered how tears flow along my cheeks, not from pain, but from the fact that for the first time in a long time someone simply saw and accepted me. Supported by his support, I felt that I was ready to overcome any obstacles. When I moved to the second year of study in high school, it seemed that everything started to change slowly but correctly until Jackson passed the entrance exams to the prestigious university in the Metropolitan District and left, leaving behind the void, which, despite all my effort, could not be filled. His room was empty, and at the same time my last security island disappeared, I was left alone with constant comparisons with Stark, an ideal brother, drawn by our parents, as if they had only now begun to truly demonstrate which of us the real expectations were assigned. While Jackson seemed easy to show his academic talents, I was left to myself in order to somehow lay my own path, as if I walked along a snowy field without traces, without pointers, relying only on an internal instinct. And it was then that I found consolation and joy in running, in this simple, but liberating movement forward, when each step tears you off from the past. I joined the school athletic school team and felt my love for running intensified, outgrown into something more, into passion, to the target. I aimed at becoming a long-distance runner, hoping to get a scholarship in athletics at a school known for its relay teams. And although Jackson succeeded in studying, he always lacked sports valor, the very area in which I felt that I could finally overshadow it, albeit not in the eyes of my parents, but at least in my own. However, my parents seemed to be only interested in academic achievements, as if everything else did not matter, as if my body that could withstand kilometers, and a spirit that did not know fatigue, was something secondary. They often lost sight of my sporting successes, even when I came with medals and diplomas, even when the coach enthusiastically said that I had potential for the national level. When Jackson was approaching his 19 years, our parents arranged something like a grandiose holiday, carefully planning an extravagant celebration, as if it were a coronation. "Buy him an expensive watch," my mother said with such a pressure as if it were a matter of honor. "If you can't afford it, forget about admission to the university," she threw in my direction, coldly and every day, as if talking about a bank account. I stayed aside when relatives gathered for a solemn dinner in honor of Jackson, at a long table, strewn with dishes, laughing, raising toasts, exchanging stories in which my name did not even sound. "Jackson deserves this because he surpasses you on the run," the mother whispered when I dared to approach, as if I wanted to prickly. "Obsession will only spoil the mood," she added with an icy grin, leaving me dinner with the noodles of quick preparation of the house, one, with tears in my eyes and steam rising from a bowl, thereby the steam in which my growing feeling of isolation and rejection was dissolved. During the summer holidays, Jackson, who was now working in a large company and impressing the person who quickly matured, suddenly returned home. He noticed my extinct gaze, my fatigue and silent loneliness, and one evening, looking at my room, said, "This is an old model, but it is fast enough to view pages. Perhaps this will even help you in study," and handed me a laptop with a warm smile. I was surprised to take it, not knowing what to say, but already feeling a quiet gratitude in my soul. He also gave me a programming guide for beginners, a thick, battered book that smelled of typographic paint and opportunities. This gift for me was the same turning point, the entry into the world of information technology, which I had not known about anything before. Despite the fact that initially I experienced difficulties with mathematical concepts that seemed to me too abstract, too far from my bodily perception of the world, I unexpectedly found joy in creating programs. In this magic, when your thoughts turn into code, and the code into action. Each successful code I wrote brought a deep sense of achieving the goal, as if I had laid out a stone behind the stone, my own bridge over the abyss. Gradually, step by step, a new passion began to crystallize. It was still fragile, uncertain, like a sprout through asphalt, but already alive. Once my father found me behind a laptop and sharply rejected this nascent dream. "Are you playing games on this computer again, instead of studying?" His voice sounded accusingly, with a reproach, as if I had let them down again. "I program and not play," I replied, not restraining disappointments, giving my tone a shade, not anger, no, but fatigue, desire to finally understand me. My words, hinting at his outdated views, at that unshakable and ossified system, in which everything is allowed to men, and women are only silence and subordination, only more and more anger. I saw how crimson spots appeared on his cheeks, how the corners of his mouth twisted, and suddenly he barked, "What kind of nonsense you are, Violet?" And at that moment, not just anger sounded in his voice, but something deeper, perhaps the fear of the fact that I could not be the way he was used to. He sharply grabbed my laptop, as if it were not a car, but an enemy, and, not hesitating for a second, he threw it out the window with force, as something shameful and unworthy of being part of the family was thrown away. I heard a crunch of glass and a knock on the ground, and in this sound there was everything: rejection, neglect, refusal to admit my passion. "Now, when he broke, maybe you will focus on study," he said with a smug grin that did not hide his satisfaction, and, without waiting for an answer, turned around and left, leaving behind only a rampant echo of broken hopes. I felt a mixture of anger and grief, so furious and at the same time powerless that I had to breathe deeply so as not to scream. I went out into the street, stepping barefoot on the cold grass to pick up the laptop, hoping that maybe he was not too injured, but when he saw him on the ground, broken, with a cracked screen, which became a bright, dumb symbol of my unfulfilled aspirations, I froze. Even among the fragments of broken dreams, my determination to pave my own path only stronger, as if a voice rose from under the wreckage, which said, "You are not broken." The laptop was irreparably damaged. It no longer turned on, its body cracked, the keys were dented, as if each of them, my attempts, my labors, my steps, was straightforward. Just when programming began to truly captivate, when I first felt that I could have a path that was different from the expectations, when it offered a glimpse of a promising future, the precious gift of my brother was in fragments, helpless, like me at that moment. Without funds for repairs, it seemed that my newfound passion could fade as suddenly as it appeared, and when I stood among the remains of a broken laptop, with a lump in my throat and weight in my chest, despair overwhelmed me with such force that for a moment I believed that it was really over. The device that symbolized my escape to the world of possibilities was now just a pile of garbage, and it was almost unbearable. There was no way to pay for repairs, and the prospect of continuing my programming, my new trip, seemed gloomy, closed by an iron door without a handle. However, once, when I went to school, lowering my head and burdened with heavy thoughts, a friend, noticing my condition, offered a simple but encouraging decision: "Why don't you use school desktop computers?" His words sounded like light through the cracks. Inspired by this idea, I gained courage and went to my computer science teacher. To my surprise, not only did not refuse, but also kindly provided me with access to a computer laboratory after classes. This room soon became my refuge, my shelter from everything, from comparisons, from ridicule, from doubt, from everything that prevented me from breathing. I could dive into programming after school, sometimes for hours, forgetting about time, forgetting about fatigue. I began to come there even on weekends, and, noticing my devotion, my teacher offered additional support, books, tips, exercises that helped me hone the skills. Indeed, my programming skills were steadily developing in high school, and at some point I already wrote simple applications that worked as I thought. And then, in the summer in the second year, my brother invited me to go to summer courses in Miami, saying, "This can become your starting point if you decide." I managed to pay for the trip with money earned from part-time jobs, and accommodation was provided in the hostel of the company where my brother worked. Additional classes in the evenings with him and his friend Charles only strengthened my interest. Charles was eccentric, a typical introvert, awkward, but gifted, and completely not accustomed to communicating with women because of his purely masculine environment and school past, but his unique presence that summer became unexpectedly important for me. My brother teased, "Do not worry, he is not bad, just a little ignorant in communication with women," he said, laughing when Charles, blushed to his ears, accidentally hit me in the corridor. Our carefree jokes, awkwardness, innocence of Charles added a special touch to those days, making my passion for programming not only intense, but also painfully desired, as if for the first time I felt what it means to be part of something real. By the end of the summer, the new head of my life opened. With the help of my brother and Charles, I completely plunged into the world of programming, with my head, with my heart, with a dream. Fascinated by his charm, this is how I began to think about Charles, because he was different from my brother in everything: polite, sophisticated, eccentric, but never malicious. His oddities were more touching than repulsive. And I suddenly turned out to be fascinated by him, not understanding exactly when this happened. When I entered the last summer of high school, reflecting on the recent destruction of my computer, my brother, as if reading my thoughts, brought home a surprise during his visit. He talked with Charles about my situation, and Charles, being from a rich family, offered a used laptop as a gift. "He loves you very much," my brother hinted with a mischievous laugh, handing me a laptop, and my face flashed with surprise and some embarrassment, especially when he played my head playfully, as in childhood. Since then, I have received many instructions, from my brother, and from Charles, and my programming skills have improved significantly. "I never thought that you would be so interested in programming," my brother remarked once, sitting next to me at the kitchen table, at which I habitually sat late, hunched over above the keyboard and looking at the screen concentratedly. His voice was not condemning, but rather amazed, with a note of good admiration, which, although rare, always warmed me. "Yes, this is exciting," I answered, not tearing my fingers from the keys, but smiling out of the corner of my lips. "Sometimes unexpected things happen, especially when there is a failure in calculations." He laughed, not because he did not understand, but because he felt I'm talking about something more than just lines of code. This new trip to programming has become for me not only training, not just the development of skills, but a real revelation, internal discovery, the detection of passion, which seemed to have slept somewhere inside, waiting for the moment to wake up and determine my future. Programming was not just entertainment, it was my breath, my zone of freedom, my way to understand the world and control it, at least within the screen. The excitement from solving a complex problem, from a logical labyrinth that managed to solve, and observation of how my programs work, not only work, but live, brought me indescribable joy, such a pure and reverent satisfaction that I did not know before. Fucked with this enthusiasm, perhaps, made the most bold decision in my life: to leave behind a university life, to abandon the generally accepted path and instead immerse myself in a career which was offered to me by a young but promising company located in the capital's region. With a new computer in my hands, with my brother's support and still fresh memories of a summer in Miami, I went to build my future, not that someone planned for me, but my own, filled with the meaning that I breathed. I sought to improve my skills, accepted each new challenge as part of my ongoing adventure, as new running tracks, only now in the digital world. Once a cold winter day, when I was already collecting things, preparing to go to this new, adult and independent stage of life, my parents unexpectedly offered a family trip. It was so unexpected that I, at first deciding that I heard, asked, "A trip? All together?" We have not done anything like this for years, and a sudden change in their mood alerted me. Nevertheless, I carefully greeted this idea, especially when I heard that my brother would also return home for this trip. We went to a luxurious hotel located in a snowy region. Everything looked perfect, even fabulous, but a strange, unnatural softness was disturbed under the surface. Throughout the trip and during our stay, the parents seemed unusually funny, and at the same time their words, their gestures, everything was as if a little not in themselves, slightly played, as if they played roles. They mainly talked about my brother's career, about the difficulties in the father's business, and not only interest, but also hidden tension sounded in their voices. The hotel offered a relaxing vacation, a pool, delicious dishes, comfort, which I admit, did not feel for a long time, but this whole warm atmosphere could not hide the fact that the warmth of the parents themselves seemed strangely stretched, like a smile that you hold for photography. Once late at night, when I got up to use the bathroom, passing by their room, I heard muffled voices, a whisper that instantly made my heart shake. "We cannot continue to spend money on her," I heard my mother's voice, cold, like ice. "It is better if she stays at home this time." And Dad's voice, affirmative and peremptory, "Yes, it's time." They discussed the cleaning of the house. Me. Putting away. Cutting off. As an extra branch. This revelation led to my heart like a stone, but I knew that I would not show pain. I decided to put up with my fate and move forward, no matter how painful. The reverse road was gloomy. There was almost no conversation, either from fatigue or because everyone was clear. Something happened. When we approached the parking lot next to the cafe, my father said that he wanted coffee. My brother, still trying to keep the neutrality, offered to stop, and while they were sitting in the car, I went to trading machines. I chose hot coffee for my father, tea for mother, and tea with milk for myself. When I turned to return to the car, I saw my father gets my suitcase from the trunk. "Well, this is a farewell," he said sharply. I froze. "It is too expensive in time and fuel. Take you to the station." Then, with a prickly squint, he added, "You are like a dog that is easy to tame with little kindness." I was stunned. "Isn't the station far from here?" I asked, hoping that maybe this is all a joke. His answer was dismissive, with disgust. "Do what you want. Run or go. You are finally in the athletics team." His tone was the last nail in the lid of the old, long, rotten love. "From this moment you need to cope yourself. Okay, cleaning is completed. You were just a mess on the way." My brother was silent, did not stand up, did not argue, but silently came up, threw my coat on a suitcase, as if saying, "I am sorry." I stood in a snowy parking lot, clutching a paper glass of tea to me, watching their car disappear into the distance, and took this sudden, final break, the end of my family connections, the end of illusions. And I felt that this was my only choice, not a prayer, not humiliation, not a request for return. A harsh but liberating decision is to go in its own way, strengthened by the stamina and determination that gave me years of athletics and programming. Standing alone in a snowy parking lot, among the snow and cold circling in the air, which no longer frightened, but only emphasized my inner clarity, I felt the beginning of a new chapter in my life, not just a transition, but a real fracture, a moment of awareness and transformation, when previous insults and pains do not become stones in the boot, but the steps that rise above. It was a moment that marked the end of one stage and the exciting beginning of the other, the one to which I went not along the beaten road, but along the overgrown path, clearing it with my own efforts. A decade later, I discovered myself going back to my hometown, now not the girl with a backpack, full of anxieties, but a confident woman who occupies the position of project manager in an advanced technological company, where every morning began with a solution to problems that could change the future. My return was caused by a professional event that was supposed to take place in a local factory, a place intertwined in my memory with both pleasant and painful memories, as if it were not just a building, but a container of the past in which each brick remembered my childhood, youth, tears, and dreams. When I was approaching a familiar place, the appearance of which has changed over the years, but remained in some way painful, anticipation and old emotions stirred up in me, as if something that had been sleeping for a long time suddenly woke up. "Violet." A familiar voice called me when I parked, and turning around, I saw my brother out of another car, his face blurred in a wide, almost childish smile, as in those rare moments when he was really happy. "I was worried that you could get lost, given how much the area has changed," he said, nodding towards new buildings and an updated road. "Don't worry, GPS perfectly delivered me here," I replied, sharing a bright moment before we plunge into the essence of our reunification, knowing that this meeting is not only numbers, reports, and plans, but something deeper. "We have a large project ahead, and the other side has high hopes. We must be on top," my brother said seriously, while we went to the factory on a rolled path sprinkled with fresh snow. "Let's see if you can keep up with me," I teased him with a grin, remembering how he once reached the finish line, and now I was going forward, not only physically, but also professionally. "Do not underestimate your sister hardened by the city," He laughed, clearly impressed, and added, "You really became strong." It was this project that brought us together again. The brother used his experience in a large corporation to launch a startup concentrated on the development of innovative mechanical decisions, and his products gained momentum, gradually reviving our struggling factory in his hometown. When we entered the factory, a rush of cold air, pierced by nostalgia, overtook me suddenly, as if the draft of time entered every corner of consciousness. It was like a step back in time. Each corner kept the echoes of my past, the old smells, muffled sounds of metal, voices that once came from the workshops. And then, as if by signal, I saw our parents awaiting us, their poses tense with anticipation, their faces collected, but their eyes are vulnerable. I felt how the desire to make amends and fear of hearing the truth was fighting in them. "Thank you for doing this whole way," said her mother. Her voice was full of remorse, and it seems that for the first time in his life he was trembling. "We are just happy to be able to help," my brother answered, trying to weaken their formalities, transfer the conversation into a business direction, but this did not relieve stress. "No, we must show our real gratitude to our respected guests from Charles Industries," my father insisted, emphasizing sincerity, carefully choosing the words, as if he wanted to make amends not only of alienation, but also his own impotence. It was at that moment that they finally noticed me. This voice seemed familiar to me. They muttered at confusion, and their expressions became puzzled affected. I could not help but grin when they slowly recognized me, now not the girl who was left, but a woman standing confidently, like a tree with deep roots. "Yes, it's me, Violet. The one that you left in the snowy mountains," I said calmly, but firmly. Their amazement was tangible, almost physical, as if someone had knocked out air from their lungs. "Violet, how are you here?" "We were told that someone from Charles Industries will come." "In fact, I am now working as the head of the project in Charles Industries," I explained, and everything was in this phrase: my pain and my strength and my path, made without their support. Father Charles became president, and after the day I was abandoned, Charles, Jackson's friend, held out a helping hand to me, I continued, feeling their views change with every word. "Jackson foresaw the future difficult times and took steps to provide me with a support system," I added, and my voice was calm because I no longer needed to prove my value. I already knew her. This meeting was not only the confrontation of the past, not only the exposure of silence, but also the movement forward, with new opportunities, with a possible forgiveness and reformulating what it means to be a family. It was a chance to reconsider the relationship and build them on the new foundations that I have now laid, with my own hands, my mind, my faith in myself. Standing in the factory that once symbolized my exception, I was ready to lead a project that could, possibly, rejuvenate it, turning old wounds into sources of power, as nature turns scars on trees into rings of time. Now I am significantly strengthened in the industry, and, in fact, I am married, and my husband is the head of the department at Charles Industries. I was sent here at the direction of the president to head the project to rejuvenate this factory, the very one with which my pain once began, and which I now return not as a daughter, but as a leader. "Do you understand?" I began, explaining while my parents and other participants in the meeting carefully listened, peering into my features, in which not youthful confusion was now reflected, but firmness, pierced by time, choice and disappointments, that everything that is happening now is not an accident, but a direct consequence of the decisions made then, that winter. At that moment, the memories of the past surfaced in all its sharpness, that day in the snowy mountains, when, it seemed, everything around was frozen not only with the weather, but also to the attitude towards me. Then my brother, quietly, as if by the way, handed me a note crumpled and quickly slipped into his palm. Having opened it, I read the truth, cold and simple. They really were going to leave me. It said, "Our parents plan to use this trip to leave you. If something happens, call this number." As it was predicted when I was alone, lost and in a difficult situation, I dialed the number, trembling not from the cold, but from fear, and Charles answered immediately. His voice was slightly embarrassed. He clearly did not know what to say, but his intonation sounded determination, as if he understood everything without further words. He admitted that he took a vacation in advance, suspecting that I might need help. "I am very grateful that you came for me," I whispered then, through tears, standing in the middle of an empty parking, trembling from the cold and pain. Charles did not say anything superfluous, silently laid my luggage in the trunk of his car, closed the door, and we left this cold, unfriendly place behind, leaving it in the rearview mirror, as they leave a terrible dream. The work that I found in Miami ended up in a subsidiary managed by Father Charles. The support of my brother and Charles has become anchor for me, a support point in a new, frightening, but inspiring world. I balance between work and study, entering the evening university. The next year, after the end, I was transferred to the main company where Charles's father was in a leading position. Using the accumulated experience and discipline with which I once ran around the school stadium, I stepped forward and persistently moved forward, and eventually took up the position in the construction of construction. While Charles himself climbed the service ladder, I took on the role of the project manager under his beginning. We worked in close contact, and my respect for him, which began with gratitude, gradually grew into a deep, sincere feeling. After his touching, thought-out proposal, I gladly agreed, and we got married. I continued to succeed in professional terms and became a participant in a large project, focused on production abroad. However, the increase in the cost of labor and currency fluctuations made foreign production less and less viable, and it was at this time that I received unexpected news from my brother. He said that our family factory is experiencing serious financial difficulties. To remain competitive, she reduced prices, so low that in the end she drove herself into a financial dead end. My brother and I realized that it was time to act, and decided to visit the family factory again. I arrived there as a representative of Charles Industries, and my presence instantly changed my parents' behavior. Their coldness was replaced by a strange, even encouraging softness. "Now, when Violet is here, we will certainly be able to find a way to overcome this crisis," the mother remarked, as if it was about the return of the Savior. "It is natural to help his family at such times," the father continued, looking directly into my eyes. But I knew, the moment came to tell the truth, no matter how bitter it was. "I have to clarify the situation," I said, allowing my voice to remain calm, but solid. "Perhaps you misunderstood, but I no longer consider you my parents, at least in the personal sense. My participation here is exclusively professional." Shocked by my words, they retorted almost in unison, "How can you be so cold? We have not raised you so heartless." I paused, then said, "The condition in which this factory is located is the result of your managerial decisions. We will carry out the overhaul of the managerial team, and it will include new staff from our headquarters." These words were as a sentence, accurate, legally verified. My father blushed, as if from anger or shame, and sharply objected, "The factory will be sold, and this should cover debts. I must be able to continue to control it, isn't it?" I shook my head, telling the harsh truth, "I can no longer trust you with this factory management. As for debts, the restructuring plan has become possible exclusively thanks to Jackson's efforts and Charles Industries' resources. And what will happen further in your life? This is your own challenge. Your task is to meet fate with what you yourself have created." This was a turning point not only in the history of the factory, but also in my personal history. Because at that moment, standing among the machines in silence, which was louder than any scream, I understood. I finally closed the head of old family connections and moved forward, with a new determination, with a clear look, with the confidence that my fate is now in my hands. Since my brother and I got out of confrontation with our parents, whose views on the world seemed to be scattered to the dust under the weight of our new, mature and relentless determination, they simply fell into the chair, as if years, tension and stubbornness surrendered their positions at one moment, and something that resembles both fatigue and, perhaps, an elusive awareness of inevitability appeared. "Well," I said, feeling a feeling similar to liberation in his chest, "it finally decides everything," but almost immediately recovered, realizing that the end is just an excuse for starters. This is not the end, although, this is actually only the beginning. I walked around the workshop, where there were already new machines sparkling chrome and hope, and added, "This place will turn into a center of internal production, and not just another factory, but a symbol of stability, a symbol of the future." "Yes," his brother picked up, and the same enthusiasm sounded in his voice. "The one that we both carried from his youth was with the production management system that you developed, and my new machines have high chances of becoming the best in the whole country." I turned to him, confidently, with the light in my eyes, and said, "No, we are not just striving to be the best in the country. We strive to be the best in the world." He laughed, sincerely, with surprise and joy, echoing these high, but now quite achievable aspirations, ambitions that no longer seemed impudence, but became our reality. As expected, our parents ultimately sold the factory, not at their own free will, but for forced necessity, and the amount that they helped for it was insufficient to cover their debts. I heard, from scraps of conversations and business reports, that they eventually ended up in the north, working in a very cold place, and it seemed to me not revenge, but with an irony of fate, which spreads everything in its place. Although they wrote and asked us money many times, we deliberately decided not to answer, not out of malice, but because we understood that there were boundaries that could not be crossed again. And yet, despite the conscious alienation, I could not completely ignore their difficult situation. I remembered the day when they left me in the cold, in the parking lot where it all started, and as an ironic gesture, almost a parable, I sent them a box of disposable hands for hands. These were the very ones that I collected during my college, warming their hands when there was not enough money for heating, and now they symbolize not revenge, but the completion of the circle that once began in the hold. Meanwhile, the factory that we acquired was completely restored and now flourished. After a large-scale reconstruction, it became the central unit of management of production reserves and shipment, and with each new month she offered more and more jobs for the local community, earning recognition and respect even outside our district. Together with my husband, a partner in life and work, I am leading new projects to expand our unit. In the future, we plan to focus on the support of American companies striving for foreign expansion, helping them enter new markets and build strong business partnerships, in which not only profit, but also principles and sustainability are valued. Our life is filled with events, the graphs merge with calendars, the days shimmer into weeks, but we find time several times a year to relax, return to where it all started, in that distant hotel, especially in winter, when the snow begins, when the frost is pinched by the nose and fingers, and silence, full of memories, hovers in the air. A visit to this place excites my heart, not with pain, not bitterness, but with warm nostalgia, as if the soul returns to the source. Something in your heart. What do you think about? My husband once asked, during one of our visits, when we stood by the window and watched the snow falling in large flakes. I smiled, not taking my eyes off the glass, behind which the same white plane lay, and replied, "Yes, this place keeps unforgettable memories. They will always be in my heart." "Me too," he said softly, taking my hand. "It all started here," he added with a smile, in which our past, the present and confident yes to the future, was reflected. I remember that day. Despite the fact that there was the middle of winter, your face was red as a boiled octopus, I teased, trying to restrain laughter, but my lips treacherously trembled. "Haha, you," he answered with a false resentment. "Your face was so red, you looked like a child who first saw the snow." We looked at each other, and both laughed, together, as before, as always. "Thank you, you." "I love you," I whispered, crowded with emotions, feelings that it was impossible to fit into the words. "No, no, thank you," he said in response, and in these simple words there was more depth than in the poems. "Life is like a book," he continued, looking into my eyes, consisting of many stories. The episodes between a couple like us form the head of this story, and this, quite exciting. He squeezed my hand, and we both froze in this silent consent, cherishing every moment of the path that once began in the snowy parking lot, where I was standing alone, and now we stood together, and knew, this journey changed our life forever.